Welcome, everybody. I cannot tell you how delighted I am that you've joined us this evening. My name is Anusha Harid-Paoletti. I'm the CEO of Ellevate Network. We are a 200,000 plus strong network of professional women in 31 cities across the globe. And I could not be more privileged to introduce Alexis McGill Johnson, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, to this conversation. So, with that, Alexis, please join us.
Thank you, Anusha. It's so good to see you. Thank you for having me today.
The pleasure is entirely ours. And I will tell you, the origin of this community call to action was so our partner, Ali McDonald, it's her brainchild. And it was after November where we found that a lot of women in our network wanted to mobilize. That's the title of our series, Mobilizing Women. It's what we do. And women's health was top of mind. And I'd like to begin this conversation on a personal note. We want to know, what was your path to becoming CEO of Planned Parenthood, and what inspires you?
Oh my goodness, such a big question. You know, it's I oftentimes think of myself as an accidental CEO of Planned Parenthood. I started off on the board in 2011. Really just learning about the organization, to be quite honest, as a proud member of Gen X, we grew up, we were born with most of these rights firmly intact. And even though we were fighting for inclusion in a number of gender equity ways, and fighting to make sure that our access to reproductive freedom was real all across the country, gender wasn't actually in my portfolio of philanthropy. It wasn't in my portfolio of work. And I had been literally just standing on the shoulders of folks who had been fighting for that. And I happened to be in New York City one day where I live, and I saw this incredible billboard that said something about, it was this little brown girl's face. And I got close to the billboard downtown, and it said, "The most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb." And I was so shocked at seeing this vibrant anti-abortion ad downtown Soho, New York. And it just kind of honestly pissed me off. And it led me into a conversation with Cecile Richards, who I'd known from my political organizing days. And, I said to her, I was like, "What is going on? Like, you have to do something about this. How dare they come here?" And, she said in all of her incredible grace and candor, someone who just left us very recently, she said, no, you need to do something about it. And she extended a challenge to me to get firmly engaged in the fight. And I joined the board within the next couple of years. I became her board chair. And so I got to ride side saddle next to her and learn a lot about the organization, what it does, how it delivers. And when Cecile stepped down, we went through a national search. We brought in another leader, and the interest didn't quite work out. And so I found myself on the board at a moment when the organization was just under a fierce attack. And the board chair at that time came to me and asked me to step in. And so I said, "Okay," famous last words, "I will get you through 2020. This is July 2019. And I said, "I will get you through 2020. And 2020, it turned out I was leading one of the most critical national healthcare organizations for women reproductive healthcare during COVID, during race reckoning, during a critical election. And, in those moments when you just really don't have time to think and you just have to step in and just do the work. And I kind of think, like many of us, we see a brass ring. We're always wondering whether or not, like, should I do that, or who's the best qualified, or how should I think about that? And then there are times where you're just like, no, you know what? I'm here. I need to make sure that this organization continues and thrives, not just survives. And I'm going to do all I can to do it.
I love that. Obviously, you had a legend in Cecile kind of giving you guidance, but I think the arc of things that piss you off and then making it a roadmap is just like a tremendous, making note to self there. I think a lot of women and men on this call have heard of Planned Parenthood, but many may not know the full extent of what Planned Parenthood's organizations do. Tell us more. Tell us about the essential work. You're on the front lines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, literally, I think our people are on the front line right now fighting tyranny, right? I mean, at every turn, because our bodies are literally under siege. And I think you're right, right? Like, I think sometimes you see a fight and you just want in. And you have to know, like, I love the fact that you started this conversation with people who are saying, you know, right after November, like, my main concern is what is going to happen to bodily autonomy. And at the end of the day, that is what Planned Parenthood does every day. We get up. Our Planned Parenthood affiliates deliver healthcare throughout 600 health centers across the country, and they do everything from cancer screenings and pap smears and STI testing, and where legal, they're providing gender affirming care, they're providing abortion care, family planning. They're doing everything they can to make sure that when someone walks through a door of Planned Parenthood, they are essentially saying, I am taking control of my own sexual and reproductive health care. I am taking control of my own agency of my own body. And every part of the organization is designed to help them do that. That is the providers that show up every day. Sometimes they are crossing picket lines and protesters to, you know, ensure that their patients can get in and get non-judgmental care immediately. Sometimes that those are the folks that are, you know, helping litigate, because sexual and reproductive health care is, you know, probably the most litigated care across this country. And so showing up in court every day, showing up in state houses to ensure that bad bills won't get passed that will deny us access to care, fighting for reimbursement equity and gender equity throughout research, and how we are treated with our reimbursement becomes really important. That all happens, across the country throughout our affiliate structure. We also have a national political arm that fights under kind of an advocacy banner to ensure federally that we're fighting for protections and really building a long-term strategy to restore our freedoms under the Constitution.
Alexis, perhaps you're not seeing the chat and the comments, but you're getting a lot of applause. So please keep the comments coming, and we will be gathering questions. So, please don't stop. I think so many threads to kind of follow there, but you talked about litigated care as a phrase. It perked my ears. And when we were thinking about what we talk about, there was a question I put in there that it felt like it was a naive question. But, I came here as an immigrant, as an adult. So I'm going to ask that naive question because I think others will, perhaps want to hear it from, a global perspective as well, from a historical lens and present day, and perhaps even as a political strategy. Why have we not been able to reclaim women's rights, women's bodily autonomy, women's health from partisan characterization in which it's framed in US political discourse? And like I said, it sounds naive, but it's been on my mind for perhaps some decades.
No, it is not naive. It is a wonderful question, Anusha. Like, honestly, it's something that, like, it's hard to comprehend in the structural political context that we live in right now, right? And that is to say that supporting reproductive freedom, supporting abortion access is a bipartisan, it is a nonpartisan issue, right? And I know people want to make it one of the most polarized issues across this nation. That's actually just not true. We have to reject that framing because the majority of people in this country want reproductive freedom to be accessible and to be legal. And since Dobbs, that number has gone up over and over again. We're at like upwards of 85% of Americans believe that abortion should be legal. And every time we are able to put that decision to the people, state by state, they have voted to protect it. That's how we know that it's not just public opinion and random samples. It's actually people who are showing up. They're taking the time off from work. They are doing what they need to do to vote, sometimes in inconvenient, off elections, to say, no, I'm going to stand for my freedom. And that is drawing people. You don't win states like Kentucky. You don't win states like Montana. You don't win states like Ohio even, or Michigan, unless you are drawing on independently minded folks, Republicans and Democrats, cross-generation, cross-race, cross geography. So I think we have to be really, really clear that when people say this is a polarized issue, like, where is the polarization? 85% of Americans don't agree on much of anything, but the fact that they actually are standing very free and clear on reproductive rights, I think, is something that we should take step in. The other piece right here is to understand, like, how can it be? And this is why we also talk about abortion being really a signifier around our democracy, because how can it be that 85% of Americans across the country believe and support reproductive freedom, and yet we are at 19-20 states that have these incredibly restrictive bans? And that is really about understanding how our structures of democracy have shifted over the last 2 decades in ways that have limited the ability for the majority of people in a state to express their opinion. So in many of these states across the country, there are state houses that are dominated by legislators that are out of sync with their constituents. There's no state in this country where criminalizing doctors is popular. There's no state where criminalizing people for going out of state to get access to abortion is popular. There's no state where criminalizing pregnant women getting access to reproductive care, where we were watching, many of these banned states lose access to high maternal mortality, practitioners, risk practitioners, because they're afraid to practice in those states. So all of the harms that are happening in a political and structural environment where the people are disconnected from where their legislators are, or rather, I would say their electeds are disconnected from where their members are. And that is how we've ended up in this situation. So it's a great question, because it just begs the question, how could it be where you could live in a state where, my girls are 12 and 15. We live in New York City. When we go to Georgia to visit my mom and my sisters, all of a sudden their rights are fundamentally different. That is completely out of whack with what the American system tells us right now.
The structures of democracy, it hits a very different note on this side of the year and at this moment, because I think we are seeing changes happen, perhaps unprecedented compared to anything we've seen in our lifetimes or previous lifetimes at every moment. So what do we know? We know the first Trump administration was hostile to women's reproductive rights. That is a true statement, including the appointment of justices that overturned Roe versus Wade. So we've lived through that historical fact. What policies from the current administration do you expect? And then I'll put a part B in there, because I think it's more for a fulsome discussion here. How are you preparing? How are your organizations preparing for this, fighting back against these attacks?
It's wild right now. I think, look, we survived the first Trump administration. We were able to do that in large part because, we should all just look at the data and the numbers. I'm a researcher by trade. So, like, to your point, I'm always looking at the data. Abortion rights are more popular than this administration. They were more popular in the election than anything. And that's why you saw so many states vote, right? 7 states vote to codify reproductive freedom in their constitutions, even if they were divided politically with where they were supporting candidates. And I think that's really important to understand. But, right now we are just seeing, we're only 3 weeks in, maybe 4 weeks, and we're just seeing a lot of chaos and confusion. This administration has thrown our domestic and global healthcare systems into chaos. They've attempted to pause federal grants. 50% of Planned Parenthood patients come to us on Medicaid, right? We are serving without judgment anyone who comes in to get the care that they need, the family planning they need, the STI testing, the breast cancer screening. We're literally sitting at the intersection of supporting and lifting up our public health infrastructure. And we are subsidizing that with the resources that we can raise to do that. They pardoned anti-abortion extremists who attacked our health centers as an official act. These are people who show up at our health centers and they scream at patients who are walking in for they don't know why they're walking into a clinic. Sometimes they're walking in to get an abortion. Sometimes they're walking in to get birth control. Sometimes they're walking in to get gender affirming care, but they are screaming at them over and over and over again. And they have taken, the reason they have been arrested is because they took extreme measures, right, to harass and provide, intimidation and fear for doctors and folks who are there. So they just let those folks out and they pardon them. They halted foreign aid and dismantled USAID, right? Again, across the globe, where the U.S. has been a leader in trying to navigate and support an international AIDS health crisis, even though we've come so far as a world in addressing and building the research to actually deal with one of the most critical, sexual and reproductive health care crises in our globe. We're undermining the research and taking away the resources to provide the care for communities. They've reimposed the global gag rule, which means that we can no longer support organizations that might support abortion across the globe. They're just disappearing pages of information where folks have gone to, especially since the Dobbs decision, where they have tried to figure out and vet the information around, from a reproductive rights standpoint, what is happening, what is legal, where to go. So reproductiverights.gov, which was set up under the Biden administration, they've just taken the pages down. So they're really challenging the kind of information and creating a space for misinformation to be available. And they've also issued an executive order to take away gender affirming care from young people. And, this is a space where I am deeply concerned. Young people have been in a mental health crisis for quite some time, and that is associated with many things related to kind of our disconnect, our digital lives, all of the ways in which young people are growing up, through COVID and so forth. But when you layer on, a young person who is grappling with their gender identity, and they don't have a community that they can talk to, and they may live in a rural area, they may not be connected to a healthcare system, and they are now telling young people that they can no longer get access to care in a community or with an organization that has helped them really navigate some of the mental challenges they have. They're putting young people in jeopardy at a time when the youth mental crisis is at all, is at an all-time high. And then last, I will just say, with respect to abortion, we're expecting a number of other attacks, defunding Planned Parenthood by trying to challenge Medicaid and, literally quote, take away access to our ability to get compensation for the care that we provide, restricting medication abortion by misusing the Comstock Act, which is an 1800s law that if they engage here will effectively ban medication abortion nationwide, and targeting our health centers and our people for all kinds of reasons. So we have a lot to be afraid of. I think, as we have seen with this administration, they are moving swiftly. They're moving with confidence, and sometimes really throwing our entire kind of federalist system, in jeopardy. And they're doing it with abandon because they're really trying to challenge the norms of what to expect. And so we should be very, very alarmed around just basic healthcare that we should be getting.
I'm having, like almost a visceral emotional reaction to what you said. So I want to ask you, you're the leader of an organization where you're taking fire from many sides. When you talked about people yelling at the women entering, how are you deciding what to tackle first, and how is your team, staying motivated? And I'm going to ask the question again because I want to keep coming back to that and reinforcing that message in terms of our network and how we stay in this. But how are you doing that with your team and facing fire from so many quarters?
It's a great question. First of all, I'd say, you don't come to work for Planned Parenthood on accident, right? Even though I said I'm quite an accidental CEO, I was in the fight. And I think, sometimes you see that fight and you want in on it, and there's a calling about it. For me, being the leader of Planned Parenthood means that I am, like, my full-time job is to be a keeper of stories. No matter where I go, someone shares their particular story around accessing reproductive freedom or rights, or being denied access to care. And so I catalog the stories. I spend time thinking about all of the women, whether they have shared those stories, kind of straight on, with all of their language and all of their words, or whether they've told me those stories just by, like, looking in my eyes and nodding and saying, thank you for doing what you were doing. It's so important. Or squeezing my hand or squeezing my arms. It just tells me that it is personal, right? It's not an accident that 1 in 3 women have been to a Planned Parenthood in their lifetime, and they've gotten incredibly intimate, non-judgmental care. And we were there for them. And so I know they are out there fighting for this. And I know many people in your network are fighting for it because they understand what it means when you are denied access. So at our core, I think most of us who work for the organization, most of us who sit in the movement, know that when you are denied bodily autonomy, when you are denied self-determination, it can set you on a trajectory that does not allow you the imagination, the freedom for your own life, and to be able to connect your own kind of ability to make decisions about if, when, and how you become a parent, if, when, and how you navigate relationships, if, when, and how you are able to build the life that you want. That is going to be the thing that becomes literally the thing that drives everything else that you do. So I sit with that a lot. My team sits with that a lot. I think with respect to prioritization, it's a challenge for any CEO, but it's even more of a challenge when you have all of these things coming at you all the time, right? This is going to be a chaotic moment. The next 6 months, we are going to be fighting Comstock. We are going to be fighting, a Medicaid defund. We are going to be thinking about every last congressional district where we know we have support, and ensuring that we are engaging in conversations with all of those members, no matter what happens, no matter what side of the aisle they sit on, to help them understand that these abortion restrictions have now made pregnancy more dangerous, that in their districts there are OBGYNs who are leaving their districts, they're leaving their states because they are afraid to stay there in practice, that there are medical residents who no longer want to come and sit inside and train in a world where they can't build their own families. So there is a fire that is built on what we know that is happening, and we are prioritizing based on what we think we can build at any moment. That is in the immediate. In the long term, Anusha, it really is the work around thinking about, they kicked us out of the Constitution 3 years ago. So what are we going to do to ensure that our children are going to get back into the Constitution in the next 15 years? How are we going to map out to understand where we need to win state by state? Because as I said, every time we get to put reproductive freedom on the ballot squarely, right, without any democratic restrictions, we're able to win these fights. So how do we actually plot across the country and ensure that we are just taking it to the people, because we know everybody's going to stand with us? And that long-term goal, I think, is really what motivates the team, that they know what the day-to-day fight is, but that they can see a long-term strategy to engage.
You talked about, being this repository of stories, and in a way, it's like bearing witness. And every day when I look at the news, I feel as though the world is watching the U.S. I mean, it was always the case, but I think in a very, very pronounced way right now, daily, every minute. And Ellevate Network has chapters across the globe, across continents. So, and you talked about USA, you talked about global trends, but to talk about that in kind of broad, sweeping terms, in terms of women's rights and access to healthcare globally, what trends are alarming you? And maybe this is to let me sleep well at night. Is there anything that's heartening?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So what trends are alarming? Well, I spoke about some of them, right? I think in the immediate, right, when you're watching, USAID be, dismantled, and you think about all the progress we've made around HIV and, other fights for our health, that's incredibly alarming in communities that have been, um, you know, um, literally forsaken for so long. Like the idea of the US taking away support in this moment feels um, just horrible. Um, I've also seen the fight back globally that I think has been incredibly powerful. And I think this is what really drove us in the Dobbs years, right? I think sometimes we think, we have movement covered because, we can look back to the, first and second wave feminism. We can look at the civil rights movement. We can look at the LGBTQ movement. We can see the progress that we have made and how we're standing so strongly, even when so many of these issues are now under attack in this administration. And then I think about kind of, the fact that Ireland has legalized abortion, right? Like a Catholic country, Europe. I think about what we've seen in Latin America, where there was an incredible movement called Niñas no Madres, right? Niñas no Madres, girls, not mothers, which had a major victory last month when the UN Human Rights Committee ruled in favor of 3 teenage rape survivors in Ecuador and Nicaragua who were forced into motherhood. So in so many ways, we are watching the globe push beyond us while we are going backwards. And so where we have always had the hubris in the US of thinking we were leading on these issues of freedom, we're now looking back, looking at our neighbors and saying, oh, no, they are the ones who are going to push us forward. And I think that dialectic of kind of where the movement trends are happening and the ways in which people are operating with abandon because they understand that this is, it is sacred. Your ability to control your life is absolutely sacred. I also think there's something really interesting about what's happening here in the US. We're actually seeing a decline in sex among young people. We're seeing a decline among young people who are engaging in relationships, and some of that we still have to unpack. Some of that is technology driven, some of that is socially driven, but some of that means that people are pausing and they're waiting and they're really thinking about what consent means and the conversations that they need to have and they need to build that were much different than our generations. And so I think that there's some kind of new a healthy sexuality that we should be kind of supporting and thinking about in ways that I think will power our future that I hadn't seen coming until the conversations that we've had over the last few years.
Thank you for that. And you use the phrase fight back. So I want to come back to that because I think on this call, we have several generations across several professional walks, all of whom are showing up because they want to play a part in that resistance on attacks to our fundamental freedoms. And I think the people on the call today, the people that will see this replay, I think they form a broad coalition, Alexis. So how can everyone on this call join the fight? How would you like us to help? And I think also just in terms of kind of the light of what they could do in their professional lives. And I'm going to come back to that question again because we have one in the chat, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think for all of you all who are you're sitting in a really important nexus. Like I think of Ellevate Network and I think about just the power of those of us who have been able to, achieve whatever hurdles, build our careers, our professional lives, and now sit in proximity or inside of executive suites where decisions are being made around what you will do as a company, what you will do as a leader, and knowing not every company is going to take a stand. Not everyone's going to be Costco. Not everyone is going to step up and say, I'm fighting for reproductive freedom. And I think there's a pathway to that, but I don't think that's the only thing. I think what matters are the people who are in those rooms who are saying, how are we going to support our people?
Yeah.
What do our people need in order to get access to care while we fight back? So ensuring that they have the benefits that they need, ensuring that they understand the scope and the limitations of where we are. Having hard conversations. Most organizations, again, nonpartisan, bipartisan, have conversations with their local chambers of commerce and their local electeds because they are doing business in a community, right? Like, you cannot build a workforce when people do not want to come to conferences, when they don't want to build families, when they don't want to be recruited into a state where they are worried about their own lives because they're afraid that being pregnant has now become an additional hurdle, particularly if you're a woman of color, right? So, like, thinking about all of the ways in which you could have conversations, not asking what people's politics are, not asking where they sit on whatever issue, but just saying, how are we going to take care of our people and why it matters? And I think starting there and starting very basically to connect the dots, I think is very important. We've seen a 20% decline in states with bans among OBGYN residents moving into those states, which means you are losing expertise. You are losing just the basic information. And for those of us who started off having children at advanced maternal age because we were 35 and older, right? Like, we're already entering into a world where our very health is being staged. So understanding how you're taking care of your people and then asking the question, so great, I'm glad we're taking care of our people. We have travel benefits, we have insurance, we have access to expertise and navigation out of state. What are we doing in our community? Because the people who are powering and supporting us also deserve to have the same benefits that folks need in order to get access to basic care. And so engaging in those conversations on that fundamental level, I think, is really important. Each of us who are sitting in these roles right now, we should be grateful for the fact that birth control became available 60 years ago, right? That is singularly responsible for a third of all of our wage gains. We would not be sitting here looking at our 401ks and our investment opportunities if our parents and grandparents didn't have access to basic birth control. So it doesn't just stop there. It means that that abortion care as well, like, when you remove that, it has a $1 billion impact on our economy. And we have to be showing and demonstrating and connecting the dots for people who wouldn't be thinking about that. So I think it's really important to show up in your leadership role. Doesn't have to be political, but it does have to be human and humanistic around understanding the impact in that. Second, I would say supporting the actual people who need care, right? Donate to abortion funds, donate to Planned Parenthoods, donate to independent providers, people who are literally on the front lines and in this moment risking their lives because the laws are changing by the second, making sure that they have the resources they need to help navigate patients out of state. It is so hard in this moment. People are terrified. And knowing that, we have, supported something called abortionfinder.org that just allows people to stay up to date. It's kind of like a kayak that allows people to kind of make their plan, connect to abortion funds, and do other things. Those are the kind of things that I think are really important. And very, very lastly, to the extent that people feel comfortable, because the world has changed, it is about sharing your story. It is about sharing your story of miscarriage. It's your story of your elective abortion. How we normalize and shift culture is important. You said this, Anusha, that hearing a story, receiving a story is about bearing, allowing somebody the grace to share their story. And it's about us bearing witness to that, right? And I think somewhere in between those things is how the spirit moves and really kind of drives literally a movement to support folks. So I think all of those things matter. And collectively, that's actually what makes the movement strong.
And I'll pick from the comments, and I think you've answered this, but I think it's worth restating. It was a question about people that are in states that are denying care. What can they do with the private sector? And I think the quote in the comments from Stacey Harris, I think it's worth repeating. It's Lauren Hobart, the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods, paying travel expenses for employees. I think that's exactly what you're talking about, and I wanted to bring that back up because it's doing just that. You're already seeing people saying they're donating, Alexis. So I think you have a rallying cry. Um, I have a question. Sorry, please go ahead.
No. I think you're right, and I think it is. It's a. I think somebody like a Dick's Sporting Goods that's like across the nation that has sway and leverage. Those voices matter, right? So like I think there's a lot of pushback. I think better to say this. A lot of companies are trying to navigate how they're going to step into this world in this space, right, without drawing the fire and the ire of being engaged on social issues. And I think there's a lot of pressure from the end. There's a lot of external pressure. I get that. That's why I said, like, you have to center it around how are you supporting your people and how are you supporting your community? And like you should be able to, because who you're drawing from, you may have an executive that can take advantage of that benefit and, confidentially, discreetly access that benefit by talking to their travel insurer and get out of town and back and no one knew where they were, right? And like they can have their own private experience. But there's somebody on a loading dock in a Dick's Sporting Goods, right? There's somebody who is going to have to, they may be an hourly wage worker. They may have to figure out how to take that time off and get in a car and drive 18 hours from Texas to Colorado and figure out how to access hotel care, figure out how to access childcare, and then get back to take care of the children that they have, because most people who access abortion are already parents. So if we are not thinking about those in a company or in a community who are the least able to take care of those benefits, then we're not actually doing our work. So it's one thing to think about what we can get, but we have to actually ask those questions. How is the person who is unloading the boxes in the big box store able to get this access? Because if they can't get it, then we actually haven't done our job.
I want to pull another set of questions I'm seeing, and I'm looking at the comments. I see you, so keep the questions coming. There's a thread going on about also access, but access to gender affirming care. There are a couple of people that are asking questions there. Is Planned Parenthood seeing a risk to gender affirming care for consenting adults? And also there's a student on the chat who's asking about, voices being excluded. So if you can talk about your work there, that would be very helpful, and risks you're seeing.
Yeah, look, I think, so the gender affirming care attacks are following the same playbook. So when I joined, and this is kind of going back to my origin story, when I joined, it was like the very beginning of the TRAP laws, the targeted restrictions against abortion providers, where they were testing ways to limit access. So Roe was the law of the land, but they were finding ways to undermine it through all of these other threads, including the Hyde Amendment and, creating these unnecessary restrictions, creating restrictions against minors. This is following the same playbook. Whether we have seen the kind of attacks on gender affirming care for minors, the attacks on traveling across state lines, the attacks on the science of gender affirming care or the, doctors who provide it, whether we are seeing what we saw in Texas around SB 8, which was the precursor to Dobbs, around the bounty hunting provision of being able to stop or attack somebody who has gotten that access to care in state. So there is a very well orchestrated machine of lawmaking that happens on the state level. And this is why I think it's so important to go back to these fundamental democracy questions, where the structures are set up so people are able to pass these laws and try to enforce these laws, even though they're not popular, and then use those to export them to neighboring states in friendly judicial systems, right? So that they can create a pathway to change essentially what the law of the land could be nationally. So we are watching the same patterns happen around gender affirming care. And I think particularly where people are feeling particularly challenged is around access to gender affirming care if you are a minor. And we're seeing some people comply in advance, right? In very concerning ways, right? Where access to care, as I talked about, is so critically important, particularly in the middle of our, youth mental health crisis. And we see providers who are making decisions to comply to what they think will happen because they are so worried. And I think when we don't actually stand up for the, to be able to provide the law and stand with folks who need access, we are compromising our values and ourselves in doing that.
I'm gonna pick some questions and what I put in the hope category of the questions and comments. People want to talk about and want to hear from you on innovative healthcare delivery models, technology that Planned Parenthood is exploring to expand access.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, like every other healthcare provider, we have built, during COVID, prior to COVID, we had talked about telehealth as like our North Star for quite some time. Many people in our community, there's a digital divide that is closing. People are still coming into health centers, but telehealth during COVID was like, a big play. And within 10 days, I think we solved for 10 years of conversation. And so we were able to provide where we can telehealth medicine to folks. And for a lot of folks, what is important about that, a lot of our affiliates, who particularly those of who are in states where they're still able to provide abortion care, it becomes important because they can provide the telehealth and create those in-person appointment slots for people who are traveling in. So just having that technology has actually maximized the space for our in-person visits from folks who may have to travel in state and they may only have a short window to get in and out. We also have, Planned Parenthood app called Planned Parenthood Direct, where we are testing and building and able to do telemedication, abortion, and other services vis-a-vis our tele-mab health. We are, obviously like the world looking at the role that AI is going to play in helping us, both cut through misinformation, because there's so much misinformation on sexual and reproductive health care, and also making our systems more efficient. So we are kind of looking at, for a lot of the healthcare industry, the costs are so outrageous and skyrocketing. And there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the space and in women's health, and thinking about how can we think about different partnerships and how can we actually maximize our own infrastructure in order to deliver as seamlessly as we can. The last thing I would say is that there are kind of the analog to this, which has always been the analog, which is just communities, right? There are, within Planned Parenthood and certainly outside of Planned Parenthood, a number of organizations and just community organizers, those women in the community that you can go to when you need help or when you need to get access that you need, and who are unapologetic and, ensuring that they have the access to the information and the resources to support and build networks that are, elevated on a community level, and supporting those maybe through abortion funds or through other community networks, I think is also very, very important.
There's a question from our founder, Janet Hansen, who's been on the front lines as well for, close to 3 decades. We're watching for who steps up, who shows backbone. And are you seeing corporations or mega donors? Are you seeing cohorts step up to the plate? Or do we need to make more noise? What is the current state of play there?
Yes, we have. We've seen a number of really, high net worth individuals step up with kind of mega donations, in the immediate era post-obs, and those resources have gone to helping us really build a patient navigation system in order to get, literally just do the logistics of getting people from where they are to where they need to be, and also help them address some of the attendant challenges around it, right? We have patients who've, come from domestic violence situations, and they, figure out, an Uber out of state to get care, and they may decide they don't want to go back, right? They may have a moment where they realize like that is not a healthy world and environment, and I really want an opportunity to start fresh. So like there's a lot that is happening in a wraparound framework that is going beyond care that is really important. I think that we need to understand that the scale of the challenge has gotten like that much greater. So our ability to provide care, over the last decade has been kind of contingent upon our ability to cobble together good policies good reimbursement rates and reimbursement equity in care, strong fundraising, and strong political environments. Now that those things are starting, depending on where you are, some of those are in disrepair. So we have to fight for stronger reimbursement equity, particularly in the states where, where we're still able to provide particularly abortion access and other sexual and reproductive care. We have to continue to fight for stronger, policy and Medicaid reimbursement. If we are defunded in this administration, it is going to be a matter of the states where we still have favorable situations and reproductive freedom champions to backfill for the next couple of years. So we need to use our political capital to fight for sourcing the care. And then the folks who are able to give, like I said, any woman who's had any ability to thrive in a corporate or at an executive level should be tithing to Planned Parenthood and should be tithing to organizations in the movement, like bar none. This is the time to just say, every month, I've got my political budget, I've got my shoe budget, I've got my family budget, I've got my things, like I have it all laid out, but like my care budget to make sure that somebody can get the access to that I may never know or never meet and likely won't, is going to be able to get the care that they need. Like in ensuring that they are delivering on the care portion is really important. Last, I would just say there is a generation of young donors that is stepping up, young donors and donors of color who are stepping up in ways that is also has made my heart sing. This is not an issue that they grew up, having to think about, but they see it as emblematic of a rollback of generations that their parents and grandparents fought for, and they are stepping into the fight really strongly. And I think the more we can support them and find different ways to connect to, those communities, it matters a ton.
This is really meant to be a call to action, and I think we're seeing that in the comments. And there's one question I'll ask before we wrap. Actually, two parts. What is the best way for us to pressure our elected officials to stand up for what their constituents actually want? Because that is an actionable step as well to add to the list of action steps. Is it letter writing? Any other ideas? Because I do think that the note I'd like us to conclude on, Alexis, is one of motivation. And I think you've done that for me personally. I'm leaving energized. So I want people to hear kind of the verb choices here. So tell us about the action piece, anything on the elected official front.
Yeah. So, look, and we will come back to you, Anusha, like, thank you for inviting me into the network. Trust that we will come back to you to say, there are going to be a set of fights that we are seeing, we're cataloging, they're already starting. And we are in a world where, yes, there is a trifecta of kind of anti-reproductive freedom folks, and there are some folks who can be moved. So we're getting clear on who our targets are, and we will make sure that they are connected to the people who are living in those states who, we have health centers and patients in all 50 states, just like the NRA. So they hear from us. That's the power of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. We make sure they hear from us when we need them to hear from us. And I think being a part of that is letter writing, that is calls in. We have seen just in the last couple of weeks the ability to stop some egregious harms because those phone lines were getting jammed. That's how electeds know that people care. We also know when they come home for recess and there are town halls, that when people show up and they spend the hour, just like you would go to your PTA meeting or whatever, and engage in a conversation, when they see those rooms full, they know that they have messed up and that we are going to hold them accountable. Our voice is aligned and it is unique. And like I said, it crosses party, it crosses ideology, it crosses race and gender and geography and states. And I think the more that we can be aligned to say, not on our watch, like that to me, I think is the most important thing. We talk about hope. I said, like, my first job is as a story keeper. When I hear, from folks and I travel across the country, and it reminds me and my team why we do this work. But my second job, and maybe even equally as important, is to be a hope dealer, and I know we are living in a world where what would I say? Like it feels like it's really hard to hold on to hope in this moment. And I would say back to us that hopelessness is a luxury, that those women who are getting in cars and they are driving hours and hours and trying to figure out kind of how they're going to make it this all work, when they are traveling state by state by state to try to figure this out, the only thing that is powering them through those long hours is hope. And so if we remember, right, that we don't get to have hopelessness in this moment, that we actually have an agency to give back and to support and ensure that like the people who are choosing hope are depending on us to choose that hope too. And the more that we do that work, the more that we do that together, and the more that we have a discipline to drive forward and hold everyone accountable, whether that's our employers, whether that's ourselves, whether that's our electeds, that's how we win. Just day by day, holding on to that hope and believing in our own agency so that someone else can believe in theirs. That's the work.
I think hope dealer is our mic drop moment. I think that was the kind of the pinnacle. Alexis, I cannot thank you enough. It's been a privilege to have this conversation with you and your team in putting this together. And thank you so much. And for us, this is a conversation we keep continuing. This is something about continued action. I want to thank everybody who joined us this evening, took time out of their evening to be here and add to the goal of mobilizing. And for anybody that's new to the network, join us. We are a big tent organization. You have a home here. We want to convene women because only then can we have this kind of discussion and then activate. So please join us. And then we have our Mobilize Women event in June. So we're going to talk some more about everything we talked about today. Thank you again, Alexis. Really been a privilege.
Thank you, Anusha. I really appreciate it. Thank you.